He didn't leave because you weren't good enough. He didn't leave because you didn't love him right. And he definitely didn't leave because you were too much. But I know that's not what your mind tells you in the quiet hours, is it? Late at night, when your chest feels hollow and every corner of your bed echoes with absence, your mind turns violent. The voice inside begins its autopsy of the past. You play scenes on repeat, hoping, begging to find the one moment that made him walk away. You rewind every smile, every touch, every time you folded yourself smaller just to keep the peace. And somehow, even when you gave everything, the story still ends with him gone, silent, distant, unreachable. You ask yourself, what did I miss? What else could I have done? But maybe the question was never what you missed. Maybe it's about what he couldn't face within himself. That's what we're going to talk about today. Not a blame game, not a healing cliché, but the truth you've always felt but maybe couldn't name. The truth Jung whispered between the lines of his writing, a truth you're about to see, reflected in the mirror of your own story. Because what happened to you, this wasn't just heartbreak. It was a confrontation with every wound you've been trying to hide since childhood. A confrontation with the parts of you that keep choosing people who leave, not because you're broken, but because that's where the echo of familiarity lives. So, if you've been carrying silent questions, if you've ever sat in the ruins of a relationship thinking, if I was more understanding, if I didn't nag, if I just stayed quiet, maybe he would have stayed. You're not alone. And you're not wrong for wanting to understand. In the next few moments, you're going to hear the kind of truth that doesn't just speak to your ears, it speaks to the part of you that's been whispering, please, just make it make sense. Take a breath. Let yourself feel this. And if anything in you already knows you need this, go ahead and subscribe. Because we talk about the things no one else wants to say out loud. The things you feel but couldn't put into words. The quiet truths that begin to free you. You're here for a reason, and something in you is finally ready to hear why he left. He didn't leave on the day he walked out. He started leaving long before that, little by little, in moments so small you could almost miss them. The way his eyes stopped lighting up when you entered the room, the delayed responses to your messages, the way he began calling you dramatic when all you wanted was reassurance, the silent shrinking of presence. You felt it, didn't you? Not like a storm, not like a crash, but like a slow erasure, as if one day you woke up and he was still there but not really. And that's what made it worse. Because how do you grieve someone who's technically still beside you? How do you explain a loss that doesn't look like loss? So you stayed. You gave more. You tried to be softer, quieter, more forgiving, less needy. But here's the thing he never told you and maybe never admitted to himself. You were too close to the parts of him he was terrified of. You saw him, not just the curated version, not just the charming, funny, strong facade. You saw his sadness. You saw the boy inside him that never felt safe. You saw his insecurity behind the confidence. You saw the flicker in his eyes when you asked if he was okay and he said, "I'm fine." And it scared the hell out of him. Carl Jung once said that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. That's what happened here. His pain was driving, not his love. His wounds, not his wisdom. And when someone hasn't met their own darkness, they will run from the light you bring. Not because they don't crave it, but because they fear what it reveals. You didn't just love him. You mirrored him. And mirrors don't lie. You think he left because you were too emotional, too intense, too honest. But the truth is, you were too real. And people who are still hiding can't handle real. It demands that they confront what they've buried. It asks for more than they've ever given. It invites them to feel, and that's something he learned early in life to avoid at all costs. So, instead of growing, he blamed you. Instead of leaning in, he leaned away. Instead of becoming, he disappeared. Not because you were too much, but because your love required a version of him he hadn't built yet. And maybe, just maybe, he knew that if he stayed, he'd have to change. Not for you, but for himself. And that terrified him more than losing you. But still, you stayed. And that's where the real story lives. Because while we're so focused on why they left, we rarely ask why we kept holding on to someone already halfway out the door. You waited. You hoped. You forgave too soon and apologized too often for needs that were never wrong. And maybe deep down, you weren't just waiting for him. Maybe you were waiting for the first person who taught you love meant abandonment to finally stay. Maybe the heartbreak isn't about this man at all. Maybe he just reopened the wound that came long before him. A wound that said, if I'm lovable, why do they always leave? If I matter, why do I always have to beg to be chosen? If I'm good enough, why do I feel so invisible? No one ever told you this, but I will. His leaving wasn't your fault, but your staying? That deserves a closer look. Because there's something in you that thought, if you just proved yourself enough, you could finally rewrite the ending. You weren't trying to love him. You were trying to heal through him. Every "I understand" was a way of soothing the child in you who wasn't understood. Every "it's okay, I forgive you" was a quiet cry from the younger you who needed someone, anyone, to stay. You weren't just in love. You were on a mission to finally be seen, chosen, protected, to turn the one who leaves into the one who stays, to flip the script. But that's the cruel part about unconscious patterns. They don't just disappear because you want them to. They repeat over and over until you're finally ready to see what they've been trying to show you all along. You see, he wasn't your first heartbreak. He was the most recent version of it, the newest face on an old wound. And Carl Jung would have nodded slowly at this part. He spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we bury, deny, hide away. Not because we're weak, but because somewhere along the way, those parts weren't welcome. Maybe for you, it was your need to be held, your anger, your softness, your voice. Maybe you learned early that being easy to love meant being quiet, being agreeable, being pleasing. And maybe the only way to survive in your earliest relationships was to abandon yourself first. So when he started to leave, you didn't fight for your worth, you fought for his presence. Even when it hurt, even when it broke you, even when every part of you whispered, "This isn't love," you stayed because your nervous system said, "This feels familiar." But here's what no one tells you. Familiar doesn't mean safe. Familiar doesn't mean healthy. Familiar doesn't mean true. It just means it's been repeated enough times to feel like home. And that's the thing about inner wounds. They don't heal just because time passes. They heal when you see them for what they are. When you stop chasing closure from the person who cracked them open. When you sit in the silence and finally say, maybe this pain isn't about him at all. Let that sink in for a moment. Breathe. You're not here because you were weak. You're here because you were loyal. Not just to him, but to a younger version of you, who still believes love must be earned. But love doesn't ask you to shrink. It doesn't ask you to wait by the door hoping. It doesn't shame your needs, silence your voice, or punish your softness. Love chooses every day, without conditions. And I know that sounds like a fantasy right now. I know it feels far away, maybe even impossible, especially when all you've known is almost love, half love, broken love. But the real tragedy? You gave all your love to someone who hadn't even met himself yet. And how can someone meet you deeply when they're still a stranger to their own heart. He didn't leave because you were too much. He left because your presence required him to look in the mirror, and the truth staring back at him was more than he could bear. But you stayed too long at the door of someone who didn't know how to knock on their own soul. And that's not shameful. It's just honest. And honesty, no matter how painful, is always the first crack where the light begins to pour in. There's something no one ever says out loud when you're left behind. Sometimes they leave because you touched something too sacred in them, not in a poetic, romantic way, in a way that unsettled them, in a way that brought their buried pain up to the surface where they could no longer look away. He didn't know how to stay, not because you weren't worthy of being stayed for, but because he hadn't built a life where presence, vulnerability, and love were safe places to exist. He learned early that love equals exposure, that closeness equals risk, that being seen equals pain. So when you came along, not perfect, but real, he felt something he didn't have language for: danger. Not because you were dangerous, but because you carried something dangerous to a person still living behind emotional armor. You carried openness. You asked questions he couldn't answer. You loved in a way that required him to show up fully, honestly, imperfectly, and he wasn't ready. He was never taught how to stay in discomfort. He was never taught how to sit with a woman's feelings without making them about his failures. He was never taught how to hold someone else's storm without running for cover. But you thought if you just loved him better, he would learn. You thought your patience would soften his resistance. You thought your consistency would calm his chaos. But love doesn't heal someone who's still in hiding. Because hiding is powerful. It's how people survive their childhoods. It's how they keep themselves from reliving abandonment, rejection, or shame. And when someone's entire identity is built around not feeling too deeply, they will always choose numbness over connection, even when the connection is everything they've ever wanted. You didn't just fall in love with him. You fell in love with the version of him that could have been. The version you saw in glimpses. The softness behind the defense. The silence after an argument where his walls dropped, just for a second. That's who you stayed for. That's who you fought for. But what no one tells you is this: falling in love with someone's potential is the fastest way to lose yourself. Because while you're loving who they could become, they're showing you who they are. And over time, you start negotiating with your own soul. You silence your instincts. You water yourself down. You label your own intuition as insecurity, because every time you brought it up, he called you too sensitive or too suspicious. And slowly, the woman who just wanted to love and be loved starts questioning her worth. Not because she is unworthy, but because she's been pouring her love into someone who was never going to meet her there. The truth? You didn't lose him. He was never really present to begin with. What you lost was the illusion. The hope that if you tried hard enough, he'd finally stay. The belief that your love could carry the weight of his healing. And now, in the rubble, what you're left with isn't just grief for him, it's grief for every version of yourself you betrayed, trying to keep him. That's the heartbreak people don't talk about. And that's the part Jung understood deeply. Because once the illusion shatters, you're not just mourning someone else's absence, you're waking up to your own. There's a moment in every heartbreak where the silence gets loud. It's not the silence of no more messages, not the silence of the phone that doesn't ring. It's the silence inside you, the one that arrives after the noise dies down, after the pleading stops, after the hope crumbles. It's the silence where you finally ask yourself, who have I been becoming while trying to be enough for someone who never chose me? That question doesn't come with fanfare. It arrives quietly, often when you're washing dishes or lying awake at 2 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, heart racing and chest aching with a grief too large for language. And when it comes, you freeze. Because deep down, you already know. You know how much of yourself you abandoned, how much of your truth you swallowed, how many times you dimmed your light just so he wouldn't squint. You remember the way you smiled through tears, the way you explained your pain in softer tones, just so it wouldn't scare him. The way you convinced yourself that crumbs of affection were a feast if you just learned to be grateful. But love shouldn't feel like starvation. And yet, there you were, hungry for presence, hungry for safety, hungry for someone to say, "I see you, I choose you, all of you." And that hunger isn't shallow. It's not desperation. It's human. It's the echo of every moment in your past where love felt like performance, where your needs were met with silence, where the people you trusted the most taught you that being lovable meant being convenient. And this man, this relationship, just became the latest stage where you reenacted the same story. Not because you were broken, but because your body remembered. That's the part no one sees, the loyalty your nervous system holds to pain that's familiar. That's why you stayed. Not because you didn't know your worth, but because somewhere along the way, pain got mixed up with love, and now your heart confuses abandonment with passion. Jung once hinted that our outer world reflects our inner landscape. And you've been living in a storm built long before he came along. He was never the creator of your wounds. He was the activator, the match to the flame. And when he left, he didn't just leave a relationship. He left you standing in the wreckage of every time you told yourself, "If I'm just a little more patient, a little more understanding, a little less emotional, then maybe, just maybe, someone would finally stay." But let's stop here for just a moment. Let's sit in this quiet. Let's stop chasing understanding, closure, analysis, and instead ask a new question. What would it mean to stop proving I'm worthy and just start being me? No more trying to earn space in someone else's life. No more walking on eggshells just to be tolerated. No more shrinking so you're easier to love. You don't need to perform. You don't need to beg. You don't need to chase. Because the version of love that requires you to disappear isn't love. And the version of you that's still waiting for him to come back isn't the one that needs saving. The one who needs saving is the girl who first learned that love hurts. She's still in there. She's been waiting for you. Not for him, not for closure, not for another apology, but for you to come back home to yourself. She's the version of you who stopped speaking when her voice was ignored, the version who smiled to survive, who kept the peace, even when everything inside her was at war. She's the one who once believed that love was something you had to earn through sacrifice. And when he left, she didn't cry because of him. She cried because she thought she failed again, because once more, she gave everything and was still left empty. But maybe now, finally, she doesn't need to keep proving anything. Not to him, not to anyone, not even to the past. Because the truth you've been circling, the one Jung would quietly point to without saying too much, is this: you weren't left because of a flaw. You were left because your love asked for truth. And truth is uncomfortable for someone who's been living in self-denial. He didn't leave because you were too emotional. He left because he wasn't ready to feel. He didn't leave because you needed too much. He left because he was still withholding everything from himself. People don't run from love. They run from what love reveals. And your love revealed things he wasn't ready to see. The places he hadn't healed. The walls he hadn't dismantled. The boy inside him still afraid to be seen without his mask. But here's the part you might not be ready to admit just yet. You weren't fully ready either. Not because you didn't want it, but because part of you thought love had to look like sacrifice. That if it didn't hurt, it couldn't be real. That's what the world doesn't teach us. That love can be easeful. That love can feel like exhale. That it doesn't have to come after years of proving and pain and pushing someone to open up. You thought you had to earn rest. But love is rest. Real love. True love. The kind of love that starts when you stop chasing and begin receiving. And that begins with you. With the moment you say, "I'm done begging to be seen." With the breath you take after saying, "No more performances. No more emotional contortion. No more trying to be enough, because you were always enough." He just didn't have the capacity to hold what you were offering. And that doesn't make him bad. It makes him human. But his limitations were never your responsibility to fix. Just like your pain is no longer a prison, you have to live inside. Maybe that's why you're still here, listening. Not because you're broken, but because some deeper part of you knows that this time the story has to end differently. You can't keep loving people who haven't even decided to love themselves. You can't keep folding yourself smaller just to fit inside someone else's comfort zone. You can't keep trying to earn from others what only you can give. It's time. Time to love the version of you who always stayed. The one who kept showing up, even when she was exhausted. The one who held space, even when she had none left for herself. The one who gave fully, wildly, sincerely, because that's just who she is. She doesn't need to be erased. She needs to be honored. He may have left, but now you have the chance to return to yourself, and that's the most important reunion of all. You're not here to be abandoned in cycles. You're here to remember you were never meant to beg for love that should have been safe from the beginning. What if the real story isn't about him walking away, but about you finally staying with yourself? Because that moment, when the door closed, when the silence fell, when the messages stopped coming, that wasn't your ending. It was your beginning. But I get it. It didn't feel like that. It felt like a loss so deep you couldn't breathe through it. Like something sacred was stolen. Like the part of you that once believed in forever had suddenly died without warning. Like you were grieving something invisible, something no one else could see or understand. Because you weren't just grieving a man. You were grieving the version of yourself who still believed you could love someone into healing. You were grieving every time you bent backwards for someone who never turned around. You were grieving the hope that this time would be different. But that version of you, the one who chased, who waited, who cried in the shower, who reread the last message 100 times trying to decode it, she doesn't need judgment. She needs your hand. She needs you to tell her, "You did your best, and I see you now." That's the healing. Not pretending it didn't hurt. Not pretending you didn't want him to stay, but looking at the ache, without turning away. Looking at the scar, and naming it. Looking at the empty space he left behind, and saying, "This is where I rebuild." And no, rebuilding doesn't mean rushing into someone new. It means learning how to sit with yourself, without shame. It means learning that peace doesn't come from being chosen by someone else. It comes from finally choosing you. It means letting go of the idea that closure lives in someone else's words. Sometimes closure is the silence that teaches you to speak differently to yourself. Sometimes it's the moment you stop writing paragraphs to someone who only ever responded with sentences. Sometimes it's the soft, slow realization that you no longer crave a love that costs you your dignity. Jung believed we don't become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, by bringing the truth up from the depths and finally facing it. So here's your truth. You never needed to earn what was already yours. You never needed to become smaller, quieter, more convenient. You never needed to prove that you were worth choosing, because you are. Exactly as you are. You without the apology. You without the disguise. You without the half-love you've been clinging to. He may have walked away, but now you get to rise. Not for revenge, not for validation, not to prove him wrong, but because the version of you that loves deeply, feels everything, and still chooses softness. She deserves to rise. She deserves to know that she never needed to carry his healing on her back. She deserves to come home to herself. There is a quiet kind of power that comes when you stop waiting for them to come back. It doesn't arrive with fireworks or applause. It doesn't shout. It whispers, gently, like a long-lost memory surfacing in the stillness. It sounds like this: I don't need them to understand why they hurt me. I just need to understand why I stayed. That's the kind of truth that doesn't just crack the surface, it breaks the entire illusion. Because love is not supposed to feel like chasing. Love is not supposed to feel like waiting for someone to become ready. Love is not supposed to feel like negotiating your needs for someone else's comfort. You know what love is? It's presence. It's being held without having to first convince someone that you're worth it. It's softness that doesn't scare them. It's being told, I'm not going anywhere, and actually believing it. And yet, somewhere along the way, you convinced yourself that intensity was proof of love, that the anxiety in your chest when he didn't reply was passion, that your tears meant you cared more. But love isn't meant to be a constant test. It isn't meant to be earned through suffering. You're not supposed to hurt more than you heal. And maybe no one ever told you this before, but the reason it hurt so deeply when he left is because his leaving mirrored every moment in your life where someone you loved disappeared when you needed them the most. This wasn't just about him. It was about the emotional blueprint you've been carrying in your chest since childhood. The blueprint that said love equals proving, that affection equals achievement, that your emotions equals burden. And so, you attracted someone who confirmed the very story your pain had always told you, not because you wanted pain, but because pain felt familiar. But familiar doesn't equal right. And here's where it changes. Not because someone else finally chooses you, but because you choose to stop participating in relationships where you're the only one doing the emotional labor. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you conscious. You're allowed to stop picking people who feel like home when home was never safe to begin with. You're allowed to unlearn the craving for chaos that disguised itself as connection. You're allowed to say, I want peace now. I want calm. I want slow mornings with someone who doesn't make me guess how they feel. But most of all, you're allowed to outgrow the version of you that needed to feel worthy. Because that's what it really was, wasn't it? It wasn't just that you loved him. It was that you felt like if he could stay, it would finally mean you were enough. But love isn't meant to rescue you. Love is meant to meet you. And when you finally meet yourself, truly without judgment, without shame, without bending to fit inside someone else's story, you'll realize the one you were waiting for wasn't him. It was always you. And when that moment comes when you stop scanning every room, every message, every silence for signs that you're being left again, you'll feel it. That shift, that soft return, not dramatic, not cinematic, but real. You'll wake up one morning and realize you didn't check your phone hoping it was him. You'll pass a place that used to carry the weight of memory, and your chest won't tighten like it used to. You'll hear the love song that once broke you, and this time, it won't. Because the ache begins to fade when you stop making someone else the author of your story. And maybe the deepest truth of all, the one that Jung alluded to, but couldn't quite say plainly, is this: the people who leave don't just exit your life. They hand you back the pieces of yourself you gave away, not to punish you, but to invite you home. He left, yes, but in doing so, he returned something you'd lost a long time ago. Yourself, your worth, no longer tangled in whether or not someone texts you back. Your beauty, no longer dependent on someone else's gaze. Your value, no longer measured in how easy you are to love. You get to hold all of that now, with trembling hands maybe, but still you hold it. And when you do, You stop craving what couldn't nourish you. You stop romanticizing the almosts. You stop calling their confusion mystery. You stop chasing the ghost of someone who never really showed up in the first place. You stop waiting, not out of bitterness, but out of reverence for yourself, because there's a version of you emerging now. She's softer, somehow, not naive-wise, not guarded clear. She knows her peace isn't up for negotiation. She knows her emotions aren't too much, they're holy. She knows her truth doesn't need to be shrunk for someone else's comfort. And if someone walks away from that, let them walk. Because the woman they're walking away from, she's finally awake. Not waiting, not begging, not bending. Awake. Awake to the truth that she is not responsible for the parts of someone else they refuse to heal. Awake to the fact that sometimes love isn't meant to last forever. Sometimes it's meant to crack you open so you can finally see what was buried beneath all that reaching. Awake to the possibility that there is a love coming, one that doesn't ask you to burn in order to keep it warm. But until that love arrives, you get to be the one who stays. You get to be the one who doesn't leave yourself. You get to become what you've always longed for. And when you do, that's when it all begins.